November 6, 1956. Harold Macmillan, Chancellor of the Exchequer, takes up the phone in London. The voice on the other end is coming from Washington. The message is brief, and it is not a request. Withdraw from Egypt immediately, or the United States will dump its sterling holdings onto the open market and collapse the British pound in a single afternoon. Macmillan does not argue. He cannot. The Bank of England is hemorrhaging reserves. The pound, the world's dominant currency for over a century, is days from total collapse. 8 days. That is how long it took to end the British Empire. Not decades. Not years. 8 days from invasion to surrender. And the weapon that delivered the killing blow was not a missile. It was a currency attack. Before we go further, this is history, not financial advice. Do your own research. Everything you're about to hear is on the record. This is a story about what happens when the world's reserve currency loses its backing. It happened to Britain. The question this channel keeps returning to is whether the same process is quietly underway in America today. What Britain had to understand what the British lost. You first have to understand what they had. In 1900, the pound sterling made up more than 60% of global foreign reserves. The dollar held essentially zero. Over 60% of world trade was settled in pounds. The sterling zone, countries that use the pound or peg their currency to it, stretched from Australia to India, from Hong Kong to the Caribbean. But what truly backed the pound was not just gold. It was military reach. British garrisons were positioned from Egypt to Bahrain to Singapore. The Suez Canal, what strategists call the jugular vein of the empire, was protected by British steel. Those bases guaranteed the trade routes. The trade routes generated the commerce. And the commerce made sterling the world's money. There was, however, a fatal weakness buried in the architecture. Foreign holdings of liquid sterling were 3 to 4 times larger than Britain's actual gold reserves. As long as no one asked for their money back at the same time, the system held. The moment confidence cracked, the math would become lethal. The crisis in July 26, 1956. Egyptian President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, using the name of the canal's original builder as a code word to trigger the seizure. Britain, France, and Israel invaded. The military operation worked. The canal was taken, but Eisenhower had other plans. The U.S. Treasury prepared to sell America's entire sterling bond holdings onto the open market. That single action would have crashed the pound. Simultaneously, Eisenhower blocked Britain from drawing on the International Monetary Fund, cutting off the financing Britain needed to import oil and food. The Bank of England bled. Academic research from Queen's University estimates first-week reserve losses at $116 million. By mid-November, total losses had reached $400 million. Britain's reserves fell through the floor. Macmillan folded. Ceasefire, November 6th, 8 days after the invasion began. The rescue came at a price, $1.3 billion from the IMF, with one condition. Full, immediate withdrawal from Egypt. Every soldier, every tank, every ship. Prime Minister Eden resigned in January. The pound survived at its old exchange rate, but only on life support. And that life support would not hold. The slow bleed. This is where the story becomes directly relevant, because what followed was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow bleed that lasted a generation. And it trapped ordinary British savers inside a sinking currency with no legal way out. Britain maintained strict exchange controls from 1939 all the way until 1979, 40 years. Ordinary citizens could not legally move their savings out of sterling, could not buy Swiss francs, could not open foreign bank accounts, could not purchase gold abroad, locked inside the currency. And the currency was dying. On November 18, 1967, Harold Wilson's government devalued the pound overnight. Wilson went on television and told the public that the pound in their pocket had not been devalued. It had. And everyone knew it. 2 months later, Wilson announced the withdrawal of all British military forces east of Suez, Malaysia, Singapore, the Persian Gulf. The withdrawal was complete by 1971. Britain's role as a global power was finished. Here is what that meant for ordinary savers. Inflation crept at first, then it accelerated. By 1974, it was running at 16%. By 1975, it hit 24%. In a single year, a quarter of your purchasing power, gone. Between 1956 and 1975, the pound lost roughly 60% of its real value. The 1973 oil shock compounded everything. Britain had just abandoned its military presence in the Gulf. No leverage, no bases, the oil price quadrupled. Coal miners went on strike. Prime Minister Heath put the country on a 3-day working week. Factories ran 3 days and went dark for 4. The lights went out in Britain, and so did the value of the pound. Gold would have saved them. The sterling price of gold rose from roughly £125 per ounce in the mid-1950s to over £360 by 1980, but exchange controls meant most citizens could not legally access it. They could only watch their savings erode. That was the only option available to them. The wealthy found workarounds: pre-existing overseas assets, Channel Islands trusts, Swiss banking connections. But the average saver, the pensioner, the school teacher, the factory worker, had none of that. They were locked inside a depreciating currency for an entire adult lifetime. How the dollar replaced sterling in February 14, 1945. President Roosevelt, returning from Yalta, weeks from death, met King Ibn Saud aboard the USS Quincy. The king had never left the Arabian Peninsula. The arrangement that emerged was straightforward: American military protection in exchange for secure access to oil. For 3 decades, gold anchored the dollar at $35 per ounce. Then Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. The dollar needed a new foundation. In 1974, Kissinger negotiated what became known as the petrodollar arrangement with Saudi Arabia. All would be priced in dollars. Surplus revenues would be recycled into American Treasury bonds. America would provide weapons and security guarantees. By 1975, every OPEC nation was pricing oil in dollars. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by oil, and by the military that protected the oil. That is the system that is now under visible stress. The parallel Samaritan national debt has crossed $36 trillion. Interest payments now exceed defense spending, a threshold that has never been crossed before in American history. The dollar's share of global reserves has been declining for 2 decades. Central banks are accumulating gold at a pace not seen in generations. And Saudi Arabia has now joined BRICS. But there is one detail that connects this history directly to the present moment. In the current conflict in the Middle East, Iranian-aligned forces are allowing Chinese and Indian tankers through the Strait of Hormuz while blocking Western vessels. This is not a blockade. It is a filter. It is a 2-tier energy system being constructed in real time, one that bypasses the American security guarantee entirely. The Gulf states are watching, and the question they are beginning to ask is the one that changes everything. If America cannot protect the oil, why are we still pricing it in dollars? How reserve currencies actually die. History gives us a clear pattern, and it is not the way most people expect. The Spanish silver dollar declined over 150 years. The Dutch guilder ruled global commerce for 2 centuries, before the Bank of Amsterdam collapsed. Following the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, sterling's decline took roughly 70 years, from the moment America overtook Britain economically in the 1870s, to clear dollar dominance by the 1950s. The pattern is consistent. Reserve currency transitions span decades. Multiple currencies coexist at the top for long periods, and the people living through the transition are always told it is not happening. Wilson told the British public the pound in their pocket was fine. It was not. Right now, no single currency is positioned to replace the dollar. The yen has capital controls. The euro has deep structural problems. There is no functioning BRICS currency. The dollar is not collapsing tomorrow, but sterling did not collapse tomorrow either. It collapsed over 30 years. And during those 30 years, every British saver who trusted the system and stayed fully in sterling lost the majority of their purchasing power. The ones who moved early, into gold, into property, into foreign assets, kept what they had. The Margaret problem. There were millions of Margarets. She held her savings in sterling because she trusted the government. Exchange controls kept her trapped inside a depreciating currency for 23 years. By the time Margaret Thatcher dismantled those controls in 1979 and freed her, 60% of her purchasing power was already gone. No one stole it. Inflation consumed it slowly, steadily, while the government told her everything was fine. Governments do not warn you before they devalue your savings. They devalue your savings, and then they tell you it did not happen. That is the lesson of sterling. That is the lesson of Suez. And that is why this channel exists. Fiscal historian. The past is never as past as they'd like you to think.